Hi friends, welcome to Eyes of My Heart. What does the word grace mean to you? Grace. I heard that word a lot growing up. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. Grace, grace, God's grace coming down from the Father above. Sweep over my spirit forever I pray with fathomless billows of love. You know, there's so much said about grace in the religious world, the spiritual world, not only in the Christian realm, but actually in other religions too. There's this idea of grace. But we use it so much that sometimes we forget, what does it really mean? And I know the little definitions I learned growing up in Sunday school and in church, and those are true. You know, grace isn't something that's deserving, but it's something that's offered. And then we have the writings in the New Testament, and that's one that I want to talk about today. The Apostle Paul, when he talks about the sufficiency of grace. I used to think of grace as something, again, it was because I had this dualistic idea of God, that God was up here and I was down here, and kind of had to beg for grace. And it was something that had to then be given. But if we've already been blessed in the heavenly realms with all spiritual blessings, as we read in Ephesians, and if 2 Peter, we already have been given everything we need to live this life of love and godliness in the world, then we already have grace. It's already here. All the grace that we need, we don't have to beg for it. And I want to read a passage of scripture that has taken on a little bit of a new understanding for me, and hope that it speaks to you as well. And this is in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, and it's that passage about the Apostle Paul who says he has some sort of thorn in the flesh. We aren't told what that is, if it's a physical thing, and there's all kinds of assumptions made based on, different things that he has said at other times. Some people think it was a vision, he had problems with his eyes, some sort of eye disease. Others think it was really more of an external thing where he was being persecuted, and he called that a thorn in the flesh. It could have been some sort of emotional thing. We don't know, but it tormented him, he said. So whether it was physical, chronic pain, some sort of issue with his eyes or whatever that was tormenting to him, or whether it was something more emotional, mental, we don't know. Whether it was somebody who just continually was persecuting him, but it tormented him. And I think we all have gone through times in our life where we have something, whether physical, emotional, relational, and it torments us to the point that we just think, if this was just removed, I could do so much more in my life for God, for others, and it becomes a real burden. So I want to share with you this passage of scripture and then look at that word grace. So here's what he said. I'm just going to pick up at verse 7. So Paul in his mind is probably trying to wonder, why was I given this? Why do I have this? And we all tend to put our understanding on things. Like when people get sick, we think, well, why did that happen to them? They're such a good person. Or we think, well, no wonder that happened to them. I think Paul was human too, and he's thinking, why did I get this thorn in the flesh that, is just weighing me down? And I think this is one of the things that he thought about, starting with verse 7. He says, to keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations. And he's talking about he had had some amazing revelations. Being a Pharisee of Pharisees, steeped in the religious traditions and rules and regulations and doctrine, he had an amazing revelation on that road to Damascus where Christ appeared in the light, or light appeared, and he knew in his heart it was Christ. That was an amazing revelation. And then he has another one, where he talks about being caught up into these heavenly realms, like an out-of-body experience. He said, where what I saw, it was just more than I could ever even express. So he's having mystical experiences. And in his mind, he might be like, nobody else seems to understand these things when I talk about them. And so it's, he says, maybe to keep me from becoming conceited, because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh. And he calls it a messenger of Satan to torment me. And that word torment, it wasn't just an annoyance. It was something that tormented him. Either physically, emotionally, relationally, we don't know. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. He didn't say, I'm going to give you grace. He said, my grace that is already here within you. It's almost like, Paul, the grace is there. When you see it, it's going to be sufficient. My power is already there, and it'll be perfected when you acknowledge it and begin to live out of it, even in your weaknesses, in your vulnerabilities, in your pain, in your torment. He never said he would take it away. Darn. Don't you want God to go, oh, you suffered enough with that, let me take it away from you. That's how we see God. That's the dualistic way. God up there. I read that. I remember reading that years ago and thinking, why did he only pray 3 times? I would have been like on that prayer chain. I would have been like going to the altar every Sunday. I would have been like, I got to get this taken care of. I have to persevere more. I have to pray more. I think something happened with Paul. And in the midst of praying, when we stop praying to get something, we bring all of our requests to God because it opens up that door of our heart into this mystical experience of prayer, of hearing God. I think something happened on that 3rd prayer. He did hear from God, deep in that part of his soul, that still small voice of God. Saying, Paul, you already have all the grace you need. And it is sufficient for what you're experiencing right now. The more you resist and keep trying to get rid of it, you're going to continue with that kind of deep torment. My grace is sufficient for my power. Sometimes we try to do things in our own power. Is made perfect in your weakness. Friends, we don't have to get rid of our weaknesses. If anything, maybe we have to learn to bring them more into the light through practicing vulnerability. And then something begins to happen. The grace that has always been there begins to move through us. And we find a sufficiency. And I think it includes that kind of peace that he talks about in the book of John that passes all understanding, that Jesus said he gives us. He said, receive, it's there, live out of it. Grace, I think, opens our eyes to see everything that's happening around us differently. And the things that we need that to enliven us, to give that peace to us, to help us tap into that power that is made perfect when we just bring our full self before God with our weaknesses and our sufferings and our vulnerabilities. It all begins to come together, and suddenly there's this power welling up within us. And we begin to live in a different way, and to see in a different way, and to experience this love of God and the people around us and life circumstances in a different way. And for me, it's just in that way of knowing I am safe, and I am secure, and I am loved no matter what, because I have the sufficiency of this love, grace, power within me, even when circumstances are sometimes tormenting and the suffering is there. Grace. You already have it. How do we awaken it? How do we get it moving through our bodies with that energy of the Spirit? I want to read the second part of that now. So the words that he hears in his heart from God is, my grace is sufficient. It's already there. You don't have to beg and plead for it. For my power is made perfect, being made perfect in your weakness, in your vulnerability. Stop resisting. Stop suppressing. Stop hiding behind your weaknesses. Bring it all into the light and let the grace and the power of the Spirit be made perfect through that, through our imperfections, through our weaknesses, through the things about ourselves we're like, dang it, if I could just, that wasn't there, I could be different in this way, or I had that gift. No, bring it all into the light. Don't let it torment you in your mind. So then, Paul says, therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that, again, not boasting to get attention, to have people say, oh, no, you're fine. He says, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, which means to me, I'm just going to go out and live my life boldly, no matter what. Stop waiting for these weaknesses to be removed, so that Christ's power may rest on me, and I am living in that power. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardship, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. The Bible is full of paradoxes. The life of Christ, the words of Christ are filled with paradoxes. When I am weak, then I am strong. Why is that? Because whatever we suppress and try to hide drains us of energy. When we bring it all into the light and rest and let that grace begin to generate that power for us, then is our strength. Don't run from your weaknesses. Don't focus on them and try to hide them and suppress them. And he's like, I'm not out there boldly saying, look at all my weaknesses. He's like, I am just suddenly finding that I can soar and live and work with sufficient grace no matter what. So if the weaknesses are there, I just go, okay, but I have the power of God within me. I don't have to be ashamed of them and hide them and suppress them. The sufficiency of God's grace is already here. Whatever you might be facing right now. And maybe it's the uncertainty of life. Maybe it's an illness. Maybe it is a relationship. Maybe it's the fear of what's happening in the world. That it will drain you of energy and deplete your power, your human power. Hear these words. As the Father says, as God the Father, the love divine, you have all the grace right now within you. It is sufficient as you open to it. You will begin to see everything that you need around you coming together to help you live a full and meaningful life in those very things that you call weaknesses and things that you feel are tormenting you. And it might be things like grief. Sometimes we just get stuck in our emotions, and that's not wrong, but just bring that into the light and let the power of this divine love that is filled with grace and that is already within you come alive and live out of it. My grace, God said, is sufficient. My power is made perfect. Think about that. It's made perfect in those weaknesses, in those sufferings. But we have to open the eyes of our heart to see it, and then we're able to live out of it. So those are my thoughts today. Grace, what does it mean to you right this very moment? Where do you need to awaken to that grace, to let that power of the Spirit begin to stir in whatever it is you're suffering. So that you, like Paul, he says, once that happened, he's like, I'm done praying for it. I'm going to live this life in the fullness of this power and grace and love of God. It can happen. So, those are my thoughts today. Thank you for listening. God bless you guys. May you glimpse in a new way this powerful grace that is at work within you in your weaknesses. Take care.